know how when you're really sick and somebody says, "Oh, I'll come over and help out," and you're like, "Oh, no, don't. This is terrible. Save yourself." Yeah, that's how we're running this week's pod. This team is so bad right now, we don't want to risk anybody else getting any on them. Welcome back to Bear Era. Things are tough in Bearland. There's no two ways around it. It is clear this team needs a lot of help, not only on the sideline next year, but also maybe from the roster. And we are going to talk about that later this week. But first, woof. We have reached the point of the season where everything is poop for the Bears.
Yeah, if you told me as I was walking out of Tottenham Hotspur Stadium that the Bears would not win another game this year, I would have been like, you are absolutely insane. Because I watched that team that day, and that team looked like a team that was working together. It looked like a team that was playing for the head coach at the time, and it looked like an offense that was ascending, a defense that was looking really good, where they were top 10 in most stats on defense. And then the bye week happens, and we knew what happened against Washington. We said it at the time. How was this team going to react? Our fear was that it was going to react in a similar way that week one did last season, where there was all this hype for this team. They got a painful loss to the Packers, and they went on losing, I think, 6 or 7 games in a row. And the same thing has happened again this year. And I can't see any reason why you could even have some level of confidence that they can be in any of these games at the end, because they're not showing the effort that they can do that. And it's really disappointing as a Bears fan, and it's disappointing when you look at certain players that are on this team that do deserve better.
Yeah, we are recording this after the Monday night, I will call it effort in air quotes, against the Vikings. Quick season summary. We'll keep this mercifully short. They are 4-10. The upcoming schedule, second game with the Lions, who just pushed the Bills to the limit. A Seahawks team that the Packers thrashed, but I don't think that's terribly relevant against this particular Bears team. And then, of course, the dreaded Packers to close out the season and really just cap off this nightmare of a campaign. I suppose it's poetic and fitting that that's the way this thing's going to end, because right now it's on fire, and it's very possible, I think likely at this point, especially after that effort against the Vikings, this team doesn't win another game this season.
Nah, no way. I don't see a scenario that they do. And it's very disappointing as a fan that wants to watch these games and wants to be actively involved in kind of being excited towards the end of the game, even if you do lose. Like, that's where the previous divisional games, while there was a lot of mistakes at the end, at least it gave you some hope that there was some good things. We're not seeing it these last 2 weeks, and it looks like a complete train wreck right now.
Yeah, I would say complete regression at this point for the Bears. Want to thank our primary partners. As little fun as we are having right now, we couldn't do it without them. Blue Wire Podcast for getting us up on the audio side every week. And then Homage Clothing. I am wearing my Always Be Closing Homage t-shirt. There are plenty of things on Homage for the holidays for either you can give yourself gifts, that's legal, or your family. Either way, if you use the link in the description, we get a cut of that. It's a great way to support the podcast. That's going to toss us into top trio. Ciaran, what is your focus? I'm not even going to say for the game this week. What is your focus for this team as it stands, or as we call it right now?
What can we salvage from this team, it seems, right now? We know that the Bears are in trouble. Like, they're in free fall. And the question is, how bad does it get? Your head coach is gone. The team looks like they've fallen apart worse than when he was here, and maybe it was a mistake kind of letting him go, just because they were at least competitive while he was there, and made, unfortunately for Bears fans that do like coaches being fired during the season, this might be a reason why they might not do it again. So it's a tough one. But look, this team feels like they've quit on the season, and there's no real sign of improvement. You can see it with the effort level. You can see it with certain guys making boneheaded mistakes that they shouldn't be making. No professional player should be making some of the mistakes that this team are. And that comes down to a lack of focus. It comes down from a lack of effort. Does it come from coaching? I don't know. I think to a certain point it actually comes down to the players. You can't always blame the coaches. These coaches that are currently taking over this team are kind of doing it on the fly. They didn't expect to be in the positions that they're in. Your offensive coordinator was your wide receivers coach. Your head coach was your passing game coordinator. Your defensive coordinator or defensive play caller, like, we can say was the defensive coordinator, but he essentially was the defensive line coach, or the job he was doing. It's tough. I think the biggest question is going to revolve around the general manager. Right now, these next 3 weeks do not matter, because the Bears aren't going to win these football games, because they're talented enough to win, but they don't work together. They don't have the plan that can help them get over that hump. So then the question becomes, well, is it coaching or is it the personnel? It's probably both. And at what point do you say that Ryan Poles doesn't survive Black Monday? And the question is, should he survive it? And that's where I find it tough, because 4 weeks ago, I don't think we're talking about this, but it's like week on week, it gets so much worse. You're seeing decisions that the general manager made that clearly didn't work. Obviously this week, the example is going to be Ciaran that was brought in. Look, 1 day's notice, but he should still be ready. He's a third round offensive lineman. If you can't play and you're a third round offensive lineman and it's towards the end of your rookie season, to me that's alarm bells, especially when you can name drop 3 or 4 guys that were taken after him that have actually looked pretty good. Like, I think the obvious one that everybody talks about is Dominic Pooney. Like, he's come in, he's looked good. He was picked, 11 or 12 picks after Amagaji. Like, at some point, those decisions that are made by the general manager have to be criticised. You look at, I know he's not a bad player, but still, it's the positional value. Then right after that, in the 4th round, you're picking a punter. Your first draft, your 3rd round wide receiver currently plays for a different football team. The year after that, your 4th round wide receiver in Tyler Scott is finally activated for 1 game. Like, these are important draft picks, and draft picks that the general manager has gotten wrong, and that is a reason you're seeing a big disconnect between the level of performance from this team, because some players that we've tried to be positive about simply aren't good enough. And then the question is, well, how does this get any better? And that's what I think leadership for the Bears needs to figure out over the next 3 weeks is a time that we need to clean house. We need to get rid of Ryan Poles, because at some point in time, you have to stop just blaming whatever coach it is. Okay, Eberflus was not a success, but to a point, coaches need talented players to win football games. And I don't think when you actually look at this roster and you want to be fair, I don't think he's put together a well-balanced roster. He's built it in the opposite way, where the offensive line and the defensive line are not good enough. If you don't have good enough offensive line and defensive line, you simply won't win football games in the National Football League. I said this last week. If you can build an average offensive line and defensive line, or a good one, you'll be in games and you'll probably win the majority of your games. It's not rocket science on how you should try and build a football team. There's a reason every draft cycle, and we'll talk about it today, we'll talk about it in future podcasts, that we talk about 10 to 15 teams that their main need heading into the draft is offensive line. Because most teams know you build that offensive line, you build the defensive line, and you start to look good. And unfortunately, that hasn't happened with the Bears. And it's kind of been the catalyst to the regression we're seeing throughout the team. You look at the defensive side of the football. Where did it start to go wrong on the defensive line? Well, you started to see guys go down really early. We spoke about when it came to the trade deadline, we needed a backup for like Billings and Javon Dexter. They didn't get that, and then suddenly Billings goes down, and the defensive line takes a step back. You look at the offensive line, it's a crap show. They need to change pretty much everybody. Maybe Darnell Wright is the only one that's salvageable right now, and that does fall at the feet of the general manager, and that is what I think is the most important thing over the next couple of weeks. That decision needs to be made. It won't be told to the public, but the Bears need to make that decision before Black Monday. That decision needs to be made next week or the week after, and they know what they're doing, because if they are moving on from the general manager, they need to make sure they know who they're bringing in.
I would fully agree with that. I also would agree that I don't think a month ago this was really a conversation. And the worst thing in the world right now for Ryan Poles is the Bears have to keep playing football because they keep looking worse. They keep regressing. And it's an almost impossible situation for the coaches, as you managed, or as you mentioned, that we've just increased their workload, and the weeks in the NFL are incredibly short. There's conversation around this week with the possible switch in Atlanta from Cousins to Penix, and people are talking about when do you get Penix meaningful reps in a week of building up to try and get him going, because you're installing a game plan, you're revising things, you're putting in game-specific stuff. There's not a lot of time. And when you look at the acceleration of the coaches, Thomas Brown in particular, this is something we brought up. We said, hey, the offense has looked good with his elevation to offensive coordinator. Now, if we elevate him another huge step to head coach, will it take a step back? Holy cow. I don't think any of us understood how big a step back that was going to cause. And we've seen it now, and the wheels have come completely off. This entire team is regressing, and the more Poles' picks and lack thereof either have to play or aren't filling holes on the roster, the more choices that were given the benefit of the doubt at the time are cast in a very different light as this season really comes to its kind of burning conclusion. And none of it is very good. That brings me to my point of focus for the week, which is I think Ryan Poles, seeing all of that and feeling it, certainly as he does inside the walls of Halas Hall, tried to play a little politics and say, hey, I didn't make all these bad decisions. It wasn't all my fault. And Kevin Warren, who is a much more experienced political actor, given his career trajectory, got wind of that and said, oh, you want to do that? You want to play? You think I can't play that? And basically gave him a backhand and said, don't do that on my watch, right? This is my show. I'm not going to be that kind of surprised. I can play that ball too. I don't really want to, but I'm certainly not going to get surprised by it. And that was the sort of clear defining moment of whose team this is and who will probably survive at the end of the season. As the games go on, again, the evidence stacks up and it just doesn't look very good for Ryan Poles for multiple reasons, many of which you mentioned. The offensive line is always going to be what people point to when they talk about eventually the failure of Ryan Poles. If he, through some miracle, survives and stays on, he knows what he has to fix. And if he does fix the offensive line, maybe it's salvageable. I don't think it is at this point. It feels like it's gone beyond that. Feels like the Bears are going to want a clean break. We'll see what happens, but I'm with you. That has to be announced early. They can't go into Black Monday unprepared. They have to have a succession plan or at least a target plan of who they're going to interview. Get that person on board, because the draft happens in NFL terms relatively quickly after the end of the season, and bringing in an entirely new crop of, scouts and evaluators and everything else, or meshing with the old ones with a new general manager who has different preferences, is very difficult to do. The sooner you do it, the better. And the Bears need to get it right. They don't have another year of padding to say, well, we made a change, so we'll just burn next year and then we'll be good the year after that. You can't do that with Caleb's rookie quarterback window. You need to be decent next year. You need to fix the holes. And if you're going to do that, you got to be up to speed almost immediately. That brings us to our fan question of the week. This one coming from Joe. Joe, we appreciate you submitting your question. The longer this spiral goes, the more it feels like they need to do to fix it. Is this offseason as simple as getting the right leader and getting an upgrade of offensive line, or does more need to be done now, and where do you even start? Great question, Joe. I feel like the first part of that is where we were a month ago. We thought, hey, if they fix the offensive line and they get the right coach, this is a talented roster. Over the last month, the cracks have started to show, and the cracks are immense. And it kind of feels like one of those home improvement jobs where you take off the drywall and you see what's underneath and you go, oh, this is way worse than I thought it was. It looked okay on the surface. As I dug into it, there are a lot of issues with effort, with fit, with folks that are quitting, with people that just don't seem to want to be playing football for the Chicago Bears. And if you're going to start over, you need to get that out of here. And that is a much bigger job. That is what we call the down to the studs renovation. So we said it last week. I'll say it again this week. This month is not going to be fun to watch as a Bears fan, but there is a lot of important evaluation going on film about who wants to play and who doesn't. And you need to get those calls right moving forward, because if you carry the rot with you, you're just going to infect next year's team and sort of break down that foundation. And you really can't afford to do that anymore. If the last 3 weeks have told us anything, it's that you do need to get away from that approach and get as clean a break, a sort of down to the basics reno as you can. Now, you can't do it entirely for a team in one season. There's just not enough dollars or draft picks. They do need to understand who wants to be a Bear going forwards and who will be contributing to a positive effort next year, and make those cuts very decisively and very quickly, because you just simply can't have this going into next season.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I'm always of the opinion that it's team over individual. It's different when you're talking about a superstar quarterback, but I would much rather have a team that's working in unison and working together than a team that's full of a bunch of individuals. And that's what the Bears look like right now. They do not look like a football team. And what Kevin Warren needs to figure out, if he makes that decision that he is removing Ryan Poles when it comes at the end of the year, because I think it's a legitimate thing that it probably should happen, because when you look at, he's been the general manager for two of the worst losing streaks in the Chicago Bears' recent history. He has built probably the worst group of offensive linemen 3 years in a row. And those are big question marks, especially when you inherit a second-year quarterback in Justin Fields. You then decide you're going to make the move and go and get your rookie quarterback, and you still don't build an adequate offensive line behind them. That's where I think a big red flag was always there. The question is, and as you said, these next couple of weeks, Kevin Warren needs to look at this and be like, which players are not performing? Which players are not trying? Because I can tell you one thing, if a new general manager and a new head coach comes in, they're going to watch what the Bears are doing, because they're going to know if they have an opportunity to have that job, they're going to know what players they want. They're going to know if they see a guy on film that's not working for the team and is quitting on his teammates, they're not going to want them around the building, because they're going to want to install their own culture that's actually one of winning football. And you don't do that by having guys that are infiltrating your locker room with negativity, or infiltrating it where it's accepted that you're not trying your hardest. And that just can't happen. I see it in so many sports, whether it's over in European football, that a new manager will come in and there'll be a big player that would have been there before, but they don't put in the effort, and suddenly they get dropped, and the team works better because all their teammates know who's not working hard. They see the film. They know exactly who it is. You only have to listen to the likes of DJ Moore, Colgan. They know exactly who's not doing what they're supposed to be doing. And you're going to hear those guys. When everybody probably gets fired at the end of the year, all those stories are going to come out. Every single one of them. And that's when this new general manager, this new head coach, if that is the case, really has to put this right and really has to fix that within the locker room before you even start to talk about who you're going to add in free agency, who you're going to add in the draft, because that is a big job. And that's why I think, to the first part of that question, that is still an incredibly important thing. They need to get the right guy. They need to get someone that can build up. And when I hear this whole thing about the leader and stuff like that, I actually, and people seem to denigrate young offensive coaches when it comes to that, like they can't be leaders. But then I go and look at Kevin O'Connell, who was the last head coach that was hired in his cycle, where I believe it was 12 coaches or 10 to 12 coaches got fired that year, and he's kind of the last one or the last one that has a like there's still the head coach from the Miami Dolphins that's still rumors around him as well. He was hired that year too. But when you look at Kevin O'Connell, last guy, people criticize that move, but he's a leader and he shows it. And that's the difference. You don't have to be a Mike Vrabel, a Bill Belichick, a Brian Flores that we just know because they've been head coaches before to show that you can be a leader. And that's going to be the biggest thing for the Bears. And that's why, from our last segment, I think is so important, is they have to be ready. Because if Ryan Poles does get fired, they need to have a general manager in here ASAP that they can make the decision. Okay, it might be a little bit different if they end up hiring like Agnew or whatever. You can probably guess that Ben Johnson will come in. That's a fairly easy transition. But if that's not the case and you're just hiring someone that is completely external, doesn't have a link to some of these top guys, they need to be in here as quick as possible so you do not repeat the mistakes of the past. Don't start interviewing head coaches before you have a general manager if you get rid of Ryan Poles. And if you don't get rid of Ryan Poles, he better fix the mess that he has created, because this is the other reason I don't know how it's salvageable for him, because the contract, but also when you've lost just as much as you've lost the faith of the fan base. How can you, in your right mind, give that general manager a contract extension? And that is the biggest issue here. And that's why I think the inevitability of what is happening at the end of the season is becoming quite clear to the majority of Bears fans and the majority of the people around the National Football League.
So, Joe, thanks for your question. I realize it's not all sunshine and roses, but it's not going to be at this time of the season. We appreciate you staying engaged. With that, we're going to get into Mike on the mic, and we're going to change it up a little bit as well. We've been focusing on keys to the game. The games mean less right now, so we're going to focus on something we talked about earlier in this particular episode: players who are important to next year's team going forward or are on the bubble and need to be looked at. So players you should be watching over the next 3 weeks to look at their effort level, to look at their effectiveness level, to look at their production, and really just whether or not they look like they want to be on the field for Chicago next year. With that, we'll turn Mike loose.
Thank you, EJ and Ciaran. And most importantly, thank you, Bears fans, for sticking with us during what has been a very frustrating end to the Chicago Bears season. So I know you don't want us pandering to you, telling you what are the keys to victory for the Chicago Bears against the Detroit Lions. We know that you want this season to end and you are looking forward to the future, to next year. And that's what we're doing here on Mike and the Mic. We're going to highlight players that are currently on the 2024 roster that will be on this team in 2025, how we want them to end the season, and what we're expecting from them next year. And of course, we're starting off with QB1, number 18, Caleb Williams, who owns the Bears' rookie quarterback records of completions, yards, and touchdowns. Currently, Caleb is ranked 19th in passing with 288 completions, 61.9% completion percentage, and 2,937 passing yards, with 17 touchdowns, 5 interceptions, a passer rating of 87.7, and a QBR of 48.1. Now, the only category Caleb is leading other starting quarterbacks in the NFL is time sacked with 58 and yards lost after a sack with 402. So moving forward, I would like to see Caleb release the ball faster. He can help a bad O-line or bad O-line play with quick decisions. Also, will he be less risk averse? A nice touchdown to interception ratio is cool enough, but being conservative does not win in the National Football League. In today's games, 50-50 ball, in some cases, is considered open in the pros, especially if you have talented receivers. And finally, touch. Can Caleb Williams, in his sophomore season training camp, hopefully with a top-tier new head coach, get the chemistry and timing down with his skilled players? Great offenses don't leave points on the field. That is what we're looking for Caleb Williams the rest of the season and what we expect for him in the 2025 season. Here on Mike and the Mike. Now back to EJ and Ciaran.
Awesome to hear Mike's thoughts on a couple of players that he's looking at over the next 3 weeks to see if they really want to be around as Bears next year. That's something we should all be focusing on. In the meantime, I'm going to put in the PSA. Take care of your mental health. I turned off the Vikings game early in the fourth quarter because I said, you know what? I can watch this later on. I don't need to subject myself to this right now. If you need to do that and check out until the draft process or even until next September, make sure you do it. Don't let this team drag you down. You can keep being a fan any way you want to. Just make sure it doesn't take you down with it. With that, any final thoughts, Ciaran?
Yeah, for everything that you said there, the negative things that are happening over these next few weeks just with the team, there will be more positive things that we'll all be talking about in just 3 short weeks where we get to talk about the future. I like this part of it where you can kind of scope out where can things get fixed. Obviously, both of us are very, very big into the draft process, so I can't wait for that to start and properly go into this because obviously it'll start with the Shrine Game, it'll start with the Senior Bowl, but as we get away from this turbulent season and start looking ahead to potential Chicago Bears players, that's when, even for all of you guys that want to turn off the Bears week on week, you will want to stick it here because we are going to be talking. We're going to have all your favorite draft guys on, and including EJ, obviously. But it's going to be a lot of fun over kind of, let's say, after these 3 weeks to where we'll get through this season together, and then we will enjoy everything, all the changes that will happen, and start to try and scope out where can the Bears fix the issue so we do not have to go through a season like this again.
Well, we're going to approach it with deep gratitude, and our first gratitude goes out to all of you who have chosen to spend time with us this season. We deeply appreciate it as a new podcast. And, of course, to our sponsors, Blue Wire and Homage Clothing. Couldn't do it without them or you. We will see you here all next week.